What? Who's this?
Hi, Moy.
Mark. Who's Mark?
Who's Mark?
Moy, is that a friend of yours?
No,
Did you invite somebody to this class?
Pew pew, pew pew.
I did not.
Uh, okay. So, I think Victor has another class right now, so I think we're gonna have to. Well, I don't think we can move our class, so I'm gonna see if Victor's gonna be able to move his class. Okay. Anyways, let me start up the recording here. Okay, and let's start talking about econ again. All right, so we ended up with the monetary policy. Quick little pop quiz. Let's say we're running a. Where do we want to start? Let's say we're running an inflationary gap. AD, SRAS, where I am right now, PL star, Y star. If I say a inflationary gap, where do I need to draw my long run arid supply?
To the left.
To the left. Oof, looks a little bit weird, but there's my YF, and there's my inflationary gap. So let's start in with fiscal policy. How would I close that inflationary gap with fiscal?
You would increase taxes
Good.
and
Or
decrease government expenditure.
that's it. Okay, and that's going to cause my 80 curve to shift to the left. Okay, and
Mhm.
then give me the four tools of monetary policy.
Those are okay. The first one was hold on in no. I always forget about the first one.
And you forget about the second one and the third one and the
No, the
fourth one.
second one I know it. The
Okay.
second one is it's differential rate. The third one is a discount rate, and the fourth one is to demand from the market, like buy bonds.
Okay. So there's going to be the reserve requirement.
Oh, that one, reserve
There's the federal
requirement.
funds rate. There's the discount rate. Okay, and then there's OMO, all open market operations. Okay, so
Okay.
reserve requirement. What is the central bank going to do here to shrink the AD?
To shrink AD, they will
Federal funds,
increase it,
discount.
increase it,
And then for open market operations, do we buy or do we
decrease
sell?
it,
Sorry, what was that?
buy,
We buy bonds from people, which means we're taking or we're giving them.
decreasing supply.
Wait, if we buy bonds from people, what are we giving them back in
Oh,
return?
we are giving them money.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay. So you want to
sell.
sell
Yeah, we
bonds
want
to
it to decrease.
people, and then you're gonna pull money out of the. Okay, there we go. Okay, because
Mhm.
in our money market, nominal interest rate, quantity of money, money demand, money supply. Okay, if you do all of these things, one or all of these things, that's gonna shrink the money supply. So what's gonna happen to my nominal interest rate?
It will increase.
Now, with a higher nominal interest rate, how does that affect this graph here?
Um, with a higher interest rate. Oh, I didn't get this yesterday.
All you need to do is just go back to CIGNX. What happens to C if interest rates are higher?
Oh, decreases
Why?
because people will prefer to put their money in savings and to
Perfect. If
consume.
I goes up, what happens to investment?
Decreases.
Because
People will save more.
not people.
Well, companies will deposit more of their money.
Not quite. Okay.
Firms
So for firms, what does that interest rate represent?
represent their opportunity cost.
Not quite. That's for the consumers. Okay. For the firms, it's more about this is what it costs them to borrow money from the bank. Okay. So easy story. Always think about my firm wants to build a new factory. I don't have enough money for it, so I'm gonna have to borrow money from the bank. But what happens if interest rates are higher now?
They won't be.
Exactly. Okay.
Uh,
Ooh, very important one. What happens to government spending?
we don't know.
Good. Okay, because that's fiscal policy. Okay, and then NX, we'll cover this in a lot more detail later, but if domestic interest rates are higher, those foreigners want to put their money in US banks, okay, but they can only put US dollars. So they start demanding US dollars more and more, which drives up the price. It makes the US dollar stronger. Well, stronger US dollar sounds good and everything, but what happens to exports?
Um,
With a strong US
decreases,
dollar, decreases.
decreases,
And with a strong US dollar, what happens to imports?
increases.
Yeah, but remember, imports, good for our consumers, but it's bad for our economy because we're not buying our stuff, we're buying their stuff. Okay? So our NX is going to fall. CIG, NX, okay, CINX, okay, those three components are going to fall. That's going to cause AD curve to shift to the left. Okay? And this is what monetarists strongly believe in. Monetarists. Okay? But remember, there's three different groups of economists that we're going to mention. Okay, there's the classical economists. And what do they think?
They think that changes in money supply have no effect on equilibrium
Ooh,
quantity.
where did
So
that come from? Okay, so the
I know.
classical
So
economists, okay, they
we
believe
have
in.
money. We have we have velocity times.
Good, good. Okay, so they're strong believers in a hands-off approach to the economy. This applies both to the federal government for fiscal policy and the central bank for monetary policy. Just leave it the crap alone, okay, and whatever problems there are in the economy, it's going to fix itself. It's self-correcting. Okay.
Okay.
So we'll actually study that today. Okay, they're
Okay.
strong believers in something called passive policy. Passive policy.
Of
Okay,
not touching the economy.
exactly. Okay, because no matter where we are in the short run, okay, in the long run, if we just leave it alone long enough, then we'll go to our YF. Okay, so again, they believe in the quantity theory of money, where M times V is equal to P times Y. Well, they're not the only ones who believe this, but their assumption here is that V and Y are very nearly constant. So real GDP is really constant. Okay, more than constant, what they believe is it's not influenced by the money supply. Okay, next up, they believe that the velocity of money is relatively constant as well. Okay, they see year after year after year after year, the same dollar bill is used roughly the same amount of times. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so if M times V is equal to P times Y, and our V and Y are relatively constant, then in that case, whatever kind of monetary policy the central bank does, what sort of effect does that have on my macroeconomy?
Um, it'll increase prices.
That's it. Okay, so for the classical economists, they don't like monetary policy because they believe whatever you do, all it's going to happen is you're going to cause inflation.
Increase prices.
Yeah,
And
that's it.
no change in real GDP.
Exactly, exactly. Okay. Then we have the monetarists who are, strong believers in monetary policy. Okay, they assume that V and Y are stable but not necessarily constant. So we're going to go back to the M times V is equal to P times Y. Okay, they believe that the V is relatively stable. Okay, and GDP, they feel like GDP increases over time. I mean, they're strong believers in economic growth. Okay, so in this case, with some sort of rise in money supply.
Let's say 8% in money
What? Okay.
supply will increase like 2% in real GDP.
Okay. What about the other?
6%.
Yeah. Okay. So you know what? They do agree. Ugh, man, that looks weird. They do agree. Okay. Money supply is going to have some effect on the price level, but it's also going to have an effect on real GDP as well. Okay. And what they believe in is something called I don't even know what to call it. Okay. What they want to do is they want to make sure that inflation is under control. Okay, the way to do that is take a look at the growth rate of GDP. Maybe growth rate of GDP is 4% this year. Then all the central bank should do is keep the money supply growing at the same rate. Because if
Mm,
that happens, then what happens to our price level?
they'll say the same.
Yeah. So these monetarists believe that the central bank, they should be using monetary policy, not necessarily to control the economy, but to control the price level.
Prices.
Yeah, just keep that
Okay.
under check to make sure that there's not crazy inflation. Okay, and the real GDP, you know what? It's gonna work itself out. Okay, all right. And then of course we have the last group, which are going to be the Keynesians. We studied these guys before because we took a look at the Keynesian cross. Okay, and the Keynesians are strong believers in fiscal. They don't really like monetary policy at all. Opposite idea with the monetarists. Okay, they like monetary policy, they don't really like fiscal. And for the classical, they don't like monetary, they don't like fiscal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
They
um,
like what they like
exactly.
and
Okay,
hate the rest.
uh, sorry, let me just get rid of these messages. Okay, so for the Keynesians, first of all, they feel like, I think I drew it here. Yeah, they feel like the money demand curve is relatively flat. If that's the case, no matter what the central bank does with money supply, what
It'll
happens
be
to the interest
almost
rate?
the same.
Yeah, the nominal interest rate won't change all too much. And they also believe no matter what happens to I, remember we say that this works because of a change in C, I, G, and X. Okay? But for the Keynesian, they don't believe that I really affects consumption all that much. I mean, do you really think about interest rates when you buy stuff?
No.
Not all the time. Okay? They don't think it influences investment all too much. I mean, firms are going to do whatever they're going to do. Okay?
Yeah.
Government, whatever. Okay? And net exports, they don't believe it influences that all too much either. Okay? So it's not going to have that much of an effect on your aggregate demand.
So
It's
they
much better to use
fiscal policy. So
because
they argue that monetary policy won't like affect
mhm,
our
yeah.
daily.
So they're not as extreme as the classical economists who feel like monetary policy all it's going to do is cause inflation. Okay, the Keynesians just believe that monetary policy, just in general, doesn't really do much of anything. Okay,
Okay, got it.
good. Good. Oh, nice little summary table here. So,
Mm.
a
Mhm.
change in the money supply affects, for the classical economists, it's just going to affect the price level. For the monetarists and the Keynesians, yeah, it will affect the price level, but it is going to affect output a little bit. Okay, the monetarists believe that this is a lot. The Keynesians believe this is very, very minimal. Okay, classical economists believe money supply is going to affect it through many variables. The interest rate. I don't know what that means. The effect is strong but limited to prices and wage. Yeah, strong. Yeah, weak. Yeah, Q and V are constant, stable, and variable. Yeah. Okay, so whatever. It's just that classical
Yeah, I
is
got
hands
it.
off. Monetarist, monetary policy, no fiscal. Keynesian, fiscal policy, no monetary. There we go. Good. And now we're going to talk about these policy perspectives in a little bit more detail, and we're going to relate it to this idea of economic growth. We've seen
Oh,
economic growth.
James,
Uh huh.
I have a point of view about the toilet paper. You know that yesterday you said it, like why people buy toilet paper
Uh huh.
because like a toilet paper is something that's cheap, but it requires a lot of space to transport. So like it is usually the first things during an emergency that companies stop to bring because it costs them a lot and they could be using that space to transport other things that cost more.
No,
No?
no. I don't think so. At least I don't think so. Okay, I
What
think
do
the
you think
reason
is
is,
the reason?
well, I mean, I think the reason is people are worried about this guy. They worried about what happens is, oh my God, everyone around me is sick, or maybe I'm sick and I can't leave my place for 2 weeks, for a month. Okay, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, during that time I need to wipe my butt. Okay, so they start stocking up on this toilet paper because they're afraid they're not going to be able to go out to the store to get it.
So you think it's more like a psychological
Yeah.
reason?
Okay, so that's why even at the store you see that besides toilet paper, milk is sold out. You see that eggs are sold out. You see potatoes are sold out. All the staples, all the stuff that you need, the basic stuff just to get by, including toilet paper, all of those are starting to go.
But toilet paper is like exaggerated.
It's the stupidest thing ever. Okay, and there's you'll study this a lot in econ. Okay, there's something called herding behavior. Okay, or you could think about it as the lemming effect. You know what lemmings are?
No.
It's those little like hamster-looking creatures, but for some
Oh,
reason,
okay.
if a group of them goes near a cliff and one jumps over, then they all start jumping over. Okay, so it's that you're not really afraid, but you're looking at what everyone else is doing, and that's making you do something, even though it's not the most rational thing. So the classic example is, let's say you're walking down the street, and then all of a sudden you see 100 people running in the opposite direction. What are you gonna do?
Run.
Do you know what they're running from?
No.
No. So logically, rationally, okay, you shouldn't be running. Okay, but maybe it is logical, maybe it is rational, because you do understand that people, they don't do stuff for no reason whatsoever, so they must be running for some purpose.
For some reason.
Yeah, and if it looks
Yeah.
like they're running away from something, maybe you should run away from it too.
So that's true that we consider our human beings like economical thinkers,
Hmm.
right?
So I mean, extend this to, I mean, we talked about the banking system. The way the banking system works, fractional reserve. Okay, that means the banks don't have all of your deposits there, right? Okay, a
Yeah.
lot of the money is loaned out to different companies all around the country. So what
Mm-hmm.
happens if some people, I don't know why, but let's say they get worried, so they go to the bank and they say, you know what, give me back all of my money right now. For those few people, the banks have enough money for that, right?
Yeah.
But what happens if that causes a herding problem? And then people around there goes, let's say I'm at the
Mm.
bank and I'm just pulling out $20 for lunch or something, and then I see somebody pulling out all of their money. What am I going to be like?
Pull out of my money.
Yeah, I'm like, why the crap are they doing that? Maybe I should do that too. So I start pulling out all my money, and then everybody starts pulling out their money to the point where the banks, they just can't handle it. Okay, they don't have everybody's money physically at the bank, and they can't say to these businesses that they loaned money out to, give me back my money right now.
So what they do?
So what they do, when this has happened in the past, the government has stepped in, okay, and they've declared bank holidays. Okay, a bank holiday is a nice way of saying that until you guys settle down, we're going to close down the banks. Nobody's allowed to come into these banks at all. Okay,
Wow.
and then what they made sure to do is something called FDIC, Federal Depositors Insurance Commission. Okay, what that means is, before the government set up this FDIC, okay, if the bank loses all your money and they go out of business, then you're screwed. Okay, all of your deposits, all the money you left there, it's
Are
gone.
lost.
Yeah, but now the government says, you know what? For every single person up until $100,000, okay, the government is going to insure that money. So even if the bank goes out of business, the government will give you, um, at most $100,000 of the money that you left there.
Mm.
So this
Oh,
makes these bank runs a little bit less likely, because people know.
yeah, because a majority of people have accounts less than $100,000.
Exactly. So they realize they don't really need to run out there, because if something bad happens, they could just get it from the government. Okay.
Uh, and
So
that gives confidence to people and
yeah, what you start
prevents it.
realizing is this study of economics, man, it's so mixed in with calculus. Man, it's so mixed in with statistics, but it's also mixed in with psychology, because you
Yeah,
have to understand how people think, okay, and how they respond to, different
hmm.
changes that are going on in the economy.
So toilet paper and quarantine.
Quite honestly, you could write a good econ paper about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Wonderful.
okay. Here we go. So when we talk about policies, there's two big branches that we could talk about. I know we talk about monetary or fiscal policy, okay, but a lot more basic. There's something called active policy and something called passive policy, okay. Active policy, or what we call discretionary policy, okay, it includes the fiscal or monetary. It just means the government or the central bank is actively doing something to fix the economy. For passive policy, this is what the classical economists love. It just means hands off. Okay? Just leave it alone, and the economy, theoretically, is going to fix itself. Okay? So let's start in with a recessionary gap. What did that look like again? Recession, PLY. I hope you're drawing this like crazy. You are,
Mm,
right?
in my mind.
Yeah, little punk.
To
Price level,
the right.
GDP, to the right, LRAS. We're facing a recessionary gap. So, in terms of active policy, man, we've talked about this so many times. For fiscal, you should increase the G or decrease the T. For monetary, you should decrease the reserve requirement, decrease the federal funds rate, decrease the discount rate in order to increase the money supply, in order to decrease the interest rate, in order to pump up consumption, investment, net exports. That'll shift 80 to the right. You see how he did that? Tell
Mm-hmm.
yourself that story enough times and it just becomes automatic. Not something that you have to memorize, but
Yeah, it's
all the
something I
steps
have
make
to
sense.
understand.
Yeah. Okay. So that's active policy. Of course, what else we could do is we could start buying bonds from people that will increase the money supply and yada, yada, yada.
Okay.
Okay. So the good thing is we're going to close that recessionary gap. So our GDP will be higher, which means our unemployment is lower. But what does that come at the cost of?
Increase our GDP and unemployment slower.
Uh huh.
Um. Oh, we'll have an inflationary gap too.
Good. Okay. It's going to cause inflation. But I told you, most of the time, we're going to be willing to deal with that because, at
The
least people have
price
jobs now.
level increases.
Yeah. Okay. But here's the thing about passive policy. Okay. The idea of just leaving it alone. Okay.
Or the
So,
price level won't increase.
yeah. Because imagine that we're in a situation with a recessionary gap. Okay. And then we just give it enough time. Well, if you think about it, with the recessionary gap, there's a lot of unemployment, right?
Yeah.
So soon, very soon, these firms start realizing, you know what, there's a lot of people without a job right now. They're desperate, desperate to work. Do you have to give them a lot of money?
Mm.
Not
Well,
really. Okay. So
yeah.
firms start realizing they could hire more workers at low wages. Okay. Maybe it doesn't happen right away, but firms start realizing this. And quite honestly, if you're a company, you start thinking, well, if I start hiring more people and other companies start hiring more people, well, that means those people have more money, which means they're going to be able to buy more stuff, which might include my stuff as well. Okay.
Okay.
So, very slowly, these firms start to hire more workers at low, low, low wages. What that's going to do is that's going to increase short run aggregate supply. And as short run aggregate supply increases, what happens to GDP?
GDP increases
Good.
too.
What happens to price level?
Decreases.
Ah, so that's a little bit better than increasing our AD. If we increase our AD, our GDP will increase, but it'll come at the cost of higher prices. If we just leave it alone with passive policy, we get that increase in GDP, but now it happens at lower prices. That's fantastic. That's a supply side boom.
Now I understand the reason why AD and SRAS exist,
Good.
because it is like two ways of increasing or decreasing
Hmm.
the GDP.
Good. Now, what happened to long run aggregate supply?
Um, well, in that case, it will be an inflationary gap,
No, in the long
or
run,
in the middle.
our long run aggregate supply just stayed the same. Okay, while we were moving around the AD or moving around the SRAS, nothing at all happened to our LRAS. Okay, remember I told you things that move around the SRAS, they don't necessarily move around the LRAS. Okay, so
Yeah.
what did we do here? We hired more workers at low wages. That has something to do with the price. Okay, do prices matter in the long run? Not really.
Oh
Okay,
no.
so our long run aggregate supply has stayed the same. Okay, remember the only thing that moves around LRAS, long run aggregate supply, is the quantity and the quality of your resources. Did we get more resources?
No, you actually have the same quantity of
Good.
resources.
You have the same amount of resources. You have the same amount of workers. It's just that you're using more of them now. Okay,
Yeah.
before some of them weren't working. Now they're working, but you still have the same amount of workers. Okay, good. So it looks like here, huh? maybe those classical economists have a point. Maybe we should just leave it alone. Maybe we should do passive policy. Okay, because the fiscal or the monetary policy, it will close the recessionary gap, but it's going to cause inflation. So tell me why you don't think passive policy is a good idea.
Um, well, passive policy
Hmm.
um, may like may like hurt us
Hmm.
during a long time
Good.
until
That's all
it
it is. Okay? I mean, how long does it take for the short run to become the long run?
exactly
I have
may
no
take
idea.
a long.
Okay? So during that time, while we're waiting for this passive policy to kick in and firms to hire more workers, people are going to be suffering like crazy because, they're going to be out of a job, or even if they're working, they're not going to be earning that much money. And trust me, the government or the central bank is not just going to wait around and do nothing while people are suffering. So even though it comes at the cost of higher price level, okay, the government and the central bank are going to do something. They're going to do active policy. Good.
Yep.
So active policy, close that recessionary gap right now. It comes at the cost of higher prices, but at least we're fixing the problem. With passive policy, oh, fantastic. You would assume, theoretically, that price level will go down, but I can't wait around for this. I have no idea how long that'll take.
Yep. So passive policy, it's good, well, but we need it faster. That's why I
It's
like
good.
the monetarist, but
Yeah, it's good
sometimes I hate.
theoretically. Okay, but again, you won't really see this in practice all too much because we can't
Yeah,
wait. Okay?
and also there will be more changes. Like
Yeah.
in real life, it is not ceteris paribus.
Yeah, what's to say that the long run active supply, while you're waiting for long run, okay, what's to say that it's not going to be bouncing around? And then it's sort of like you're trying to hit a moving target.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Okay, and just thinking realistically, if the federal government is just waiting around for the situation to fix itself, let me tell you something: the federal government is not going to stay the federal government for long. Okay,
All
because
right,
for most
they'll
countries,
change.
yeah, for most countries, the government is voted in. And if they're not doing their job, if they're just sitting around while we're in a deep, deep recession, the people are not going to vote for them again.
Right.
Okay. Let's do the same story with an expansionary gap. This one is actually easier to think about. So price level, GDP. What type of GDP? Real GDP.
Oh, uh-huh.
How do we measure price level?
Mm, where it
CPI.
internet.
CPI. CPI.
Ah,
Okay. So we have this inflationary gap, and what's the problem with an inflationary gap? There
inflationary
you go.
gap. We
Inflation is
have,
the problem with an inflationary gap.
yeah, we
Okay.
have extra money in the streets.
All right. So let's say we do some active policy. Okay. What's the active fiscal policy to do here? What's the appropriate fiscal policy?
You increase taxes,
Hmm.
decrease government expenditure.
Good. And then for monetary policy, you could increase the reserve requirement. You could
Better
increase the federal
return
funds. You could increase the
on
discount. You could start buying bonds.
buying
Buying
bonds,
bonds.
yeah,
You could start
or
selling bonds to people. I'm sorry.
selling, yeah.
Okay. And for all of those reasons, it's going to cause our 80 curve to shift to the left. So the good thing is,
Um, price levels will decrease, but
good,
GDP will decrease.
but GDP will decrease. You'll be causing some unemployment. But that's
Mhm.
okay because at Y star, I have to say my unemployment was a little bit too low. There were just too many people working, and that's what was overheating my economy. So I know it sounds weird, but I'm actually okay, removing some people from their jobs.
Okay.
Okay. Now let's do it in terms of the classical way, the passive policy.
Because usually when you decrease prices and also decrease the GDP,
Hmm.
like in the long run, the economy may stabilize again,
Hmm.
and you will have more GDP with lower prices.
I could see that. Okay. Now,
Okay.
okay, let's work with the passive policy.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem right now with the inflationary gap is inflation. Prices are starting to go higher and higher and higher and higher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, it seems like our GDP is really high, which means we're hiring a lot of people.
Okay.
So, since a lot of people are working, and now price level is starting to go higher and higher and higher, if this continues for a long time and those workers finally get off of their labor contracts and they have to negotiate for new labor contracts, what do you think they're going to do in terms of the wages they ask for?
They will ask them to increase.
Yeah, because they're going to say, hey man, take a look at the economy. There's 10% inflation, give me 10% more wages.
Yeah.
Well, for the firms, they start taking a look at this and they start thinking, well, maybe I'm hiring too many workers. Maybe it's costing me too much money, so I should start firing some people. So, slowly, ever so slowly, the firms decide to reduce production. That's going to cause the SRAS to shift to the left. Hmm. But what happened to my price level?
Hold on. I think I lost you. 1 second.
Mhm.
Okay. So price level will increase,
What happened to my GDP?
decrease.
You see the problem here? Okay, this is what we call stagflation again. You have the problem of lowering GDP, stagnation, at the same time that you have rising price level, which is inflation. And remember,
Which is the worst thing that could ever happen to an economy.
yeah, and remember what we were trying to do? We were trying to close out the inflationary gap. We were trying to fix the inflation problem, but with passive policy, what we did is we actually made the inflation problem even worse. Okay, so in terms of closing a recessionary gap, maybe the passive policy is better, but we just can't wait around for it. Okay, but in terms of closing an inflationary gap, nah, man, passive policy just sucks. Okay, so this is much more of a reason for the government or the central bank to do active policy to cool down the aggregate demand. Cool.
So that's what will happen. Always with inflation, if we don't um do something about it, it may be worse, like a stagnation.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Okay. So it looks like active policy is our better option. Okay, but even with active policy, there's going to be some problems here. Okay. First thing is what we call the identification problem. I mean, for you and me, it's so easy to figure out what's going on with our economy because I draw it out for you. Okay, we assume that we're in a recessionary gap or we assume that we're in an inflationary gap. But in real life, identifying where the economy is right now, it's so freaking hard. Okay, I mean, how do we figure out this long run aggregate supply? How do we figure out this full employment output? I don't know. Remember, I said that this was our goal, our target, where we want to be. How the heck do we know where we want to be? Kind of tough.
Good question.
Okay, next up, a forecasting problem, meaning how do we graph out the actual AD and AS
Yeah, there
curves?
are so many firms, so many productions,
What
so
the
many.
crazy? So for us, boom, there's AD, boom, there's SRAS. But in the real world, how the crap do we get that information?
I
Tough.
always think about that.
Yeah. Uh, Coordination problems. Okay. Uh, Remember, we actually like it this way. We want the federal government to control fiscal policy. We want the central bank to control monetary policy, and we want these guys to be independent of each other. But that might lead to some coordination problems where the government might decide to do expansionary policy, but the central bank decides to do contractionary policy, and it might cancel each other out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's also timing lags. Okay. I mean, just the fact that you decide to do something. Let's say the government decides to increase government spending. Okay. Is that going to have an immediate impact on GDP?
No.
No. Okay. So it might take a little bit of time for this policy to work itself out in the economy. Okay. So that, our 80 curve, it doesn't just jump out automatically. It just moves very, very slowly. Okay. What else is there? a recognition lag. Okay, we need some time to figure out what the crap is going on. Okay, remember, all of this is built around data. Okay, and it's so hard to understand the price level, it's so hard to understand GDP. So instead of that, what we like to focus on is inflation and unemployment. Okay, but you understand that inflation takes a little bit of time to calculate. Unemployment takes a little bit of time to calculate because we need to go around and we need to talk with people. Okay, so while we're talking with people, maybe the situation is going to change a little bit. Okay, maybe when we start to talk to people, unemployment is a problem, but when we start talking with the last person, maybe that problem is fixed. We have decision making lags, meaning once we figure out what the problem is, okay, it takes a little bit of time to decide what to do. Okay, for no other reason than, well, at least in the US, this has to go through Congress. Okay, so you have the Democrats, you have the Republicans, and so many times they do not agree on what the government should do.
Or like when they have to approve
The budget, yeah,
the
like,
budget. It
yeah,
is it is a mess.
yeah, okay. And again, while they're arguing and debating and yelling at each other and doing these negative campaign ads and all that kind of stuff, the economy could be changing during that time. Okay,
It's so
same idea with
not
implementation lag. Okay, after we figure out what to do, okay, then it needs some time to be put into place. Okay, you can't just say, let's increase government spending. You need to figure out what to do. You need to figure out, I'm going to build this
where to
freeway.
increase.
I'm going to, yeah, all the logistics, it takes some time. And of course, even after you get all that done, there's going to be an effectiveness lag as well. Okay, so all the changes you made, it's going to take some time to affect the economy. Okay, and then again, taking a look at all of this together, that active policy might look great, but then it just might take a little bit too long to get put into action. All right, so now we're going to focus on economic growth. Okay, we saw that you can understand it very easily as an increase in the long run aggregate supply. That's known as economic growth. Okay, so how do we do that? What determines our long run aggregate supply?
Um well um it is determined by, I don't know, the real situation of the economy, like like where we are going to stand,
I repeated this many times.
quantity and quality.
Of the resources, that's it. Okay, that's the only way that we determine LRAS. That's the only way that we have economic growth, by increasing the quantity or the quality of our resources. Okay, what does not matter in the long run is what you pay these resources. I don't care what you pay your workers. I don't care what you pay for your machines. What I care about is how many workers and how many machines my economy has. Okay,
Okay.
all right. So we use this idea of GDP to kind of measure how well our economy is doing. Okay, but a lot of the times what we'd like to do is we'd like to take a look at that real GDP per capita. What does per capita mean?
Per person.
Per person. Okay, so we take a look at that real GDP divided by the population. And then that's a measure of the standard of living, because you get to see on average how much each person in your economy is earning. Okay, and of course, if for one country, I think in the U.S. it's something like $40,000 to $50,000. Okay, so you could think the average person earns 50,000. Okay, of course, at the same time you look at this, you also have to take a look at the Gini coefficient. What's the Gini coefficient? What does that measure?
Um, Inequality.
Nice. Okay, so at the same time that you're looking at the average person, you have to look at what's the difference between the richest person and the poorest person, the income gap. That's the Gini coefficient. Okay, so the way we actually measure economic growth, it's not necessarily just GDP, real GDP increasing. We want to make sure that per capita real GDP is increasing. Okay, and rule of 70, forget about that. It's just a mathematical thing. So Gini coefficient. Okay, Okay, just because we have economic growth, it doesn't mean that everyone is better off. It could be that the rich people are better off and the poor people just keep on getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
Okay. Different views about connections between economic growth and economic equality. Okay. There's some economists who believe that this income gap is just a natural part of economic growth. Okay. I mean, if you think about it, it's the hard workers, it's the smart people that are causing the economy to grow. But those smart people and those hard workers are going to start earning more and more money. And the lazy people, they're just going to start earning less and less and less and less. So
Hmm.
maybe that economic growth is going to cause more income inequality. There's some other economists who think, you know what, it doesn't have to be that way. It could be the case that your economy is growing and everybody is better off. We just need people not to be greedy and selfish.
Like in Finland.
Something like. Okay. Um, I don't know. I don't know. There's no real answer for this. Okay. They're still debating this. Okay. And uh, it's starting to become really important because there's more and
If it weren't like that, communism will be the way to go.
it could be. Okay. And quite honestly, if the government was smart enough, if the government was kind enough and they cared about the people enough, maybe communism could work. Maybe. Okay.
Yeah, but I think that communism doesn't work because there will always be like that sense of I want to be the best or I want to have more.
Is that a bad thing?
No,
No,
that's
I mean that's what causes innovation and causes our economy to grow. So if we get rid of that, then maybe our economy just becomes very stagnant.
Mhm,
So how do we get this economic growth? What I told you was the quantity and the quality of economic resources. Okay,
mhm.
we see that with the PPF curve, but again, the PPF curve is a little bit too simple to be thought about realistically. So instead of that, okay, we like to focus on long run aggregate supply shifting to the right. Each factor that shifts out the PPF can be seen as the increase in productivity. Yeah, so um, it's not just having more resources, but maybe having better resources. So increasing your productivity or increasing your technology. Okay.
Okay, quality of resources.
Yeah. Okay. But increasing the quantity, or a lot of times increasing the quality of resources, it requires an investment
From where?
from firms. Okay. Firms need to spend money to make their production a little bit better. Okay. But the great thing about investment spending is, again, what is investment?
Like consumption of the firms.
Uh huh. And what are they buying?
They are buying things that may make them like more productive, like may
Perfect.
earn them more money.
Perfect. Okay. They're buying stuff that'll make them more productive. They're buying stuff that will help them make more in the future. Okay. What that means is it's something known as capital accumulation. They're buying more machines. They're buying more factories. They're making it so that they're going to be able to increase their production capabilities in the future. Okay. So here's the fantastic thing about this one guy, I. Okay. You see that this is a component of aggregate demand.
CIGNX.
Yeah. CIGNX. So what happens if firms spend more on investment? Well, that's just going to cause our AD curve to shift out to the right. Great.
Mm-hmm.
That
Thank you.
increases our GDP. Okay. But if you think about it, because these firms are investing, since they're buying up more and more capital, what happens to our LRAS in the future?
Hmm. If they if CIGNX is increasing, it'll move to the left.
No, it'll move to the right. Because again, what determines LRAS?
Uh, Quantity and quality.
What you did was you increased the quantity or the quality of your
Um,
resources. So
but
I has the benefit of helping my economy right now, CIGNX, but it also helps my economy in the long run aggregate supply, because I'm gathering up more resources. Okay, you don't have that with consumption. With consumption, it just helps your economy right now, and then that's it. Okay,
Mhm.
but with investments, that's fantastic. Okay, so investment is going to shift out your AD in the current, but it's going to shift out your LRES in the future. So sometimes what the government does is they focus on supply side policies, something to maybe not necessarily focus on AD so much, but they want to focus on the AS. Okay, and this is where we'll start up next time. Moy, we
Okay.
made a lot of progress today.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so hold on one second. Let's see, policy perspective. We'll get done with this in our next class. Then we're going to talk about gains from trade. We already talked about that. We already talked about comparative advantage and stuff like that. Okay,
Mm.
and then we're going to talk about imports and exports a little bit. And then we'll talk about foreign exchange, and then we'll be done with macro.
Seriously,
Seriously.
you're making me happy.
Okay, the reason behind that is a lot of the stuff in macro we already covered in micro. So these are supposed to be two completely separate classes. So it could be the case that a student just takes macro. Okay, and then what they need to do is they need to cover the supply and demand and price ceiling, price floor, welfare economics, all that basic stuff, elasticity. Okay,
Oh,
they need to cover that in macro. Okay, but we already covered that in micro, so we just zoomed into the new material. Okay, so that's why it's always a good idea to take both of these guys at the same time.
okay, that makes sense.
In any
So
case,
when we finish, we'll be able to review everything rock and roll, right?
rock and roll. Okay, and then we'll do mock test, and then we'll do mock test, and then we'll do mock tests.
And then after a few mock tests, we'll do the test.
I'm not sure. With Corona being the way it is, I'm not sure when that test is going to come. We'll see. All right, I'll see you
Are
tomorrow.
you in quarantine
I'm working from home. I'm not quarantined, but I'm trying to stay away from people as much as possible.
with Sophia?
Yeah, yeah. So just the wife and the baby. Nobody else.
Yeah, I am also doing that.